Revolutionary greetings, comrades. You are okay. We are still struggling with the internet connection. I don't know why. We have discussed the Zimbabwe Communist Party constitution, the part where we're to define the purpose of the Zimbabwe Communist Party. Because a party must clearly define its purpose, why it exists. So we've discussed that. Esasifuna ukwenza manje is to get into the program of the Zimbabwe Communist Party. What is the program of the Zimbabwe Communist Party? We had a congress in 2019 and they adopted this political program. So what is this political program? So this is what we are discussing. We'll try to run a number of series so that we understand the program of the Zimbabwe Communist Party. Let's look into the introduction of the program. And we are saying, which we will try to break down as we're doing when we're discussing the constitution of the Zimbabwe Communist Party. Ukuthi sekuchazise kuhle kungabi lo muntu ozathi nakazwanga ukuthi sithini. It was generally believed that when the Union Jack was lowered and the Zimbabwean flag was raised on 18th April 1980, that the liberation struggle was over. Zimbabwe would no longer be ruled by white settlers nor by their kith and kin in Britain. In 1980 we celebrated sathi thina sesithole uzibusa, sathi sesithole i-independence, and we believed ukuthi the new nation called Zimbabwe was no longer going to be ruled by white minority regime nor by Britain, but it was going to be ruled by Zimbabweans themselves. And we make this clear distinction so that we understand. When we say Zimbabwe will no longer be ruled by white settlers, that's the first part, nor by their kith and kin in Britain. We want to explain at this point. There's a general belief that our liberation war defeated the British. It is not the case. On 21 November 1965, Ian Douglas Smith and his friends unilaterally declared independence in Southern Rhodesia. In other words, they rebelled against the crown. This is why sanctions were imposed on Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, because the white settlers had unilaterally declared independence, that they were independent from the crown or independent from Britain. Because in a number of African countries, the colonialists understood that at some point majority rule was going to happen. It happened in West Central Africa. We discussed this question when we were discussing West Africa and the Sahel region and the influence of France in West and Central Africa. That France, Belgium, Britain, and the other colonialists, Spain and others understood that at some point majority rule was going to happen. So they wanted a majority rule which they themselves were going to usher. In other words, babefuna ukuthi umbuso wabaningi, umbuso wabantu abawentando yeningi kube yibona abachoyo ukuthi ngubani okumele abusa. Because at the core of their interests was ukuthi at the core of this transfer of power which they wanted to do, because they knew that majority rule was going to happen, was their economic interests. Who was going to control, to take care of their economic interests under majority rule. So this is why when the federation, which started in 1953 to 1963 for 10 years, federation involving Southern Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, Nyasaland, and now Malawi. When it then collapsed, Malawi and Zambia gained independence in 1964. When we're supposed to gain majority rule as well in what was called Southern Rhodesia, Smith resisted, the white settlers resisted, and they unilaterally declared independence. Right? So for 15 years, during the struggle for national liberation, we were fighting against the white minority rule in what was Rhodesia. Right? So in 1980, the point that we are then making here, in 1980, on 18 April, we thought that Zimbabwe, a new state that had emerged, was no longer going to be ruled by white settlers. That is Smith and his gang. Because also Ian Smith, in the course of the Liberation War, Smith, notwithstanding that at some point he had said that there was not going to be a majority rule for 1,000 years, he also understood and accepted that majority rule was inevitable. This is why he had to quote other leaders in Rhodesia, and the one that we all know, Abel Muzorewa, in 1979, when there was something for 6 months, something called Zimbabwe Rhodesia, in 1979 for about 6 months. Because Ian Douglas Smith also understood that majority rule was going to happen. But this majority rule, according to Ian Douglas Smith, was also meant to take care of the economic interests of the white settlers. This is why they then fronted Abel Muzorewa. So on 18 April 1980, we thought that Zimbabwe was no longer going to be ruled by white settlers, nor their kith and kin in Britain. So I wanted to explain this point. And we continue, we say the red star of socialism was right there on our new flag. In the near future, it was believed there would be social ownership of the means of production. Zimbabwe would be owned collectively by its own people, and soon everyone would have a nice house with electricity and running water. There would be regular and well-paid employment for the workers, and a better land and a farming equipment for the peasants. Free health and a free education would be there for all. So these were the expectations of the mass of the people of Zimbabwe from the 18th of April 1980. And there are others. Comrades betting Zimbabwe was a socialist, was pursuing what one would call a socialist economy. No, yes, the flag, the star was there in the flag. If you look into the Zimbabwean flag, I think I once wrote an article in 2016 during this flag movement, defining what that movement stood for and so forth. So, and so people believed that in the first decade of the majority rule, there was socialism, which was not the case. But the expectation from the mass of the people was that we're going to have a good life as I've read here. And then we continue on point number 3, that without doubt, the protracted People's War conducted by the soldiers of ZIPRA and ZANDA, with the active support of the majority of the people of Zimbabwe, brought an end to the colonial settler state of Rhodesia. This was truly a step forward in our history, but the people did not shed their blood simply to rid themselves of white settler domination. They did so with the hope of improving the living standards of themselves and their children, and of establishing a stable political, economic, and a social environment under which this could happen. Just to explain just a few points, we are saying that the struggle that was waged by Zimbabweans themselves, because the ZANU-PF then makes this fundamental mistake, which again the generals made, the army generals in 2002, when they said they are not going to salute anyone who did not go to war. The majority of Zimbabweans, particularly peasants and workers, participated in the struggle, because a war by its very nature does not require everyone to carry a gun. So the ZIPRA and the ZANDA cadres were supported by peasants, by workers that were contributing financially in the struggle for national liberation. It was workers that were buying clothes for the ZIPRA and the ZANDA combatants. It was the villagers that would give shelter and the food to ZANDA and the ZIPRA. As a young kid, I was about 9 during the struggle for national liberation. We used to go to the hills to give food to ZANDA forces. So the struggle was waged by the majority of the people of Zimbabwe. So it would be safe to say it was a people struggling against colonialism. This is why on 18 April, there was my expectations of the people were high. We never thought after 18 April 1980 that we're going to find ourselves, the majority of Zimbabweans, in foreign lands, where we now earn the label Amakwerekwere. We're all over. You will see from next week the queue at the border. Indicating the failure of the Zimbabwean government, or would it betrayed the aspirations of the people as expressed on 18 April 1980. So we continue. Conditions in 1980 may not have been conducive for the immediate building of socialism, but they were conducive for the building of national democratic economy. The building of such an economy, the characteristics which we will describe later, we have discussed when we're discussing the purpose of the Zimbabwe Communist Party, what we mean by building a national democratic economy as a transitional stage to socialism, then ultimately in the building of a communist society. But as we move to conclusion, there are just 2 points that before we conclude, I want to address. We then ask this question in our program. This is the introduction of the Zimbabwe Communist Party program. We are saying what then went wrong, and we are making 2 critical points. One, we are saying firstly, it was a mistake to believe that the interests of white settlers and the British ruling class were the same simply because they were of the same color. I've said Ian Douglas Smith and the white settlers, they rebelled against the crown, the British crown, in November 1965, and they unilaterally declared independence because Britain understood that majority rule was to happen, and it wanted to happen in 1964, 1965, as was the case with the Zambia and the Malawi. But because the interests of the settlers in Rhodesia were different from the interests of the British, even though they were white. Because because if you are white, you have the same interest. It is not the case. And the second point we are making, it was a mistake to imagine that the political leadership of the new ruling party had the same class interests as the black majority simply because they were of the same color, black. It was a mistake to say because the white settlers, the settlers were white and the British were white, therefore they had the same interests. No. It was also a mistake to say that the political leadership, because it was black, and as the mass of the people were black or black, and our interests were the same. No. Our interests are different. So it's a class question that we are raising in our program. That Britain was driven by its own economic interests, which were different from that of the Rhodesians. Right? The political leadership, as we have seen in the last 44 years, it is clear that their interests are different from our own interests as the majority of the people of Zimbabwe. They are looting, there is corruption, there is nepotism. Our interest, the majority, we simply need access to accommodation. Basic things, we just need shelter. That's what we need. We do not need mansions. We need just shelter. We need access to clean running water. We need electricity. We need at least 3 meals a day. We need to take our kids to school for them to receive quality education. We need to be treated whenever we are ill. These are the basic things that we need as the majority of Zimbabweans. The interests of the elite, the political leadership, are different from our own interests. Their own interest is simple to loot. So we are given this background as the Zimbabwe Communist Party because we have understood ukuthi singobani, who are we as the Zimbabwe Communist Party, and what is our program. So it is important that we give this historical background so that when we stand out there and say the Zimbabwe Communist Party exists to complete the liberation of Zimbabwe, we are demonstrating that in 1980 our liberation was not complete. And Kwame Nkrumah characterizes that as the creation of a neo-colonial state. So what happened on 18 April 1980, even though the calendar siyabhala independence, on April 18 siyabesgida the Independence Day, celebrating 45th anniversary of independence, it is not independence. We simply ushered in a neo-colonial state. A neo-colonial state meaning that Tina, the majority of the people, we have no control over the productive means. We control nothing, we have no land, we don't own the financial institutions, we have no industries. We do not control the decisive means of production. Our economy is not in our hands. This is why we must complete the liberation of Zimbabwe, so that we place the economy of Zimbabwe in the hands of society as a whole. Please write your comments. Continue to follow us in these discussions. Amandla comrades, goodbye.